Πόσο πιο πάνω. Ναι, ναι, σ' ακούω, αλλά πόσο πιο πάνω από εδώ, ρε παιδί μου. Εκεί είμαι. Πόσο πιο ψηλό από αυτό. Σχεδόν πιάνω την πόρτα. Εκείνη η πόρτα. Αυτό τώρα. Τι πιο μέσα, τι εννοείς. Πιο μέσα. Zoom. Όχι. Ε, ε. Ναι, παίρνει το channel 2 ενώ εγώ έχω συνδεθεί στο channel 1. Περίμενε λίγο. Channel 1, input 1. Τι μαλακία έχει παιχτεί, γιατί είναι ανοιχτό το μικρόφωνο της κάμερας, πώς το κλείνεις. Το α και το μη στην κάμερα, τι να σημαίνει άραγε. Το θέλω στο μη, ναι, θέλω να κλείσω το μικρόφωνο.
Can you hear me? Are these working? Yes, can you hear me all right? Okay, I want first to apologize for starting late. You'll be amazed to hear that there was a technical problem. I'm not surprised. I have the pleasure this evening of introducing a team of speakers who will tell us about Amarynthos. We have with us the Ephor, Ms. Angeliki Simosi, and we also have Tamara Saggini, who works on the excavations. And these two will also take part along with Sylvian's talk on these excavations, which are very, very productive indeed. I would just want to say that Sylvian I have not known for a very long time, but we are both members of an extraordinarily exclusive club, and that is those who have served as Mellon professors at the American School of Classical Studies, where all you have to do is take around 20 bright, enthusiastic graduate students all over Greece every single year, and they still give you a paycheck. It's absolutely amazing and a wonderful way to do things. Syl and I are actually part of a subgroup of that group, and this is something, I don't know whether it's good or bad, but see if you can connect the dots with what does Eugene Vanderpool, Colin Edmondson, Fred Cooper, myself, Kevin Daly, and Sylvian Fachard have in common. The answer is, of course, we were all professors, but the other thing that we did and spent a lot of time with and all wrote on are the borders of Attica and the forts that protected them. You would have thought that by now we would have solved every single possible problem about the borders of Attica and the forts, but if you are in the audience and you want someday to be a Mellon professor, then I would recommend that you immediately take up the study of Athenian border forts, and you will double your chances right away. Sylvian, of course, is well enough known to this audience that I need hardly say anything. I will simply say that he left us because he wanted to be the director of the Swiss school and a full professor in the beautiful city of Lausanne. So you're dealing with a very rational person who has chosen to continue his important work with the Swiss school. Sylvian is particularly adept in that he is both comfortable with surface survey and also with excavations. And as I say, he has studied borders and he has studied forts in Athens, in Eretria and Argos, and anywhere else there is a border to be found and protected. In more recent years, he has been working on the very impressive site of Amarynthos on Euboea, and that is the topic, as you can see on the screen, of tonight's lecture. But I'm going first to ask Madam Simosi to say a few introductory words, and then we will hear from the two of the excavators. So thank you very much for coming. Madam Simosi.
Καλησπέρα σας, αξιότιμες κυρίες και αξιότιμοι κύριοι. Ονομάζομαι Αγγελική Σίμωση και είμαι η προϊσταμένη στην ΕΦΑΕΒΙΑΣ. Η ολιγόλογη αναφορά μου στο ελληνοελβετικό πρόγραμμα στην περιοχή της Εύβοιας αποτελεί στην ουσία ένα ευχαριστήριο κείμενο για την τόσο αγαστή και γόνιμη συνεργασία μας με τους Ελβετούς συναδέλφους και την Ελβετική Αρχαιολογική Σχολή, μία από τις παλαιότερες ξένες σχολές στην Ελλάδα που δραστηριοποιήθηκε στην Ελλάδα. Αγαθή τύχη για μένα να συνεργάζομαι πάλι με την Ελβετική Αρχαιολογική Σχολή στην υποβρύχια αρχαιολογική έρευνα στο ναυάγιο των Αντικηθήρων και ακόμα παλιότερα όταν υπηρετούσα στην εφορία εναλίων αρχαιοτήτων στο φράχτη στην κοιλάδα της Αργολίδας. Το Αρτεμίσιο της Αμαρύνθου αποτελεί μια σημαντική ανακάλυψη αφού πρόκειται για αρχαιολογική θέση γνωστή από τις αρχαίες πηγές. Επιπλέον, με την ανακάλυψη αυτή επιβεβαιώνεται η ιδιαίτερη λατρεία της Αρτέμιδας στην Εύβοια, η οποία ήταν ευρέως διαδεδομένη σε όλο το νησί, από το βορρά με το ιερό της Προσιώας Αρτέμιδος στο Αρτεμίσιο, κοντά στη Χαλκίδα με το ιερό της Αυλιδίας Αρτέμιδος και τώρα με το ιερό της Αμαρισσίας Αρτέμιδος στην Αμάρυνθο. Η θεά Άρτεμι λοιπόν λατρεύεται όσο κανένας άλλος θεός στην Εύβοια, ακόμα και από την πρώιμη αρχαιότητα. Η έρευνα στην περιοχή επικεντρώνεται στις προημότερες φάσεις του ιερού, που όπως φαίνεται λειτουργούσε από τους γεωμετρικούς ακόμα χρόνους, και με την ανασκαφή και μελέτη του προϊστορικού οικισμού στον παρακείμενο λόφο παλαιοεκκλησιές, όπου βρέθηκαν 4 χιλιετίες ανθρώπινης κατοίκησης. Περισσότερα από 600 θαυμάσια αφιερώματα βρέθηκαν στον πλούσιο αποθέτη μπροστά από το ιερό, καταδεικνύοντας την πίστη των αφιερωτών τους στην πολυλατρεμένη θεά Αρτέμιδα. Η επιφανειακή έρευνα ανάμεσα στην Ερέτρια και στην Αμάρυνθο, με την ονομασία Ερέτρια Amarynthos Survey Project, αποσκοπεί στην ένταξη του ιερού της μου συνεργάτηδες στην εφορία αρχαιοτήτων Ευβοίας, τις αρχαιολόγους κυρίες Όλγα Κυριαζή και Φανή Σταυρουλάκη. Σας ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ. Όσοι είστε εδώ και δεν έχετε έρθει, θα ήθελα να σας προσκαλέσω στο καινούριο Αρχαιολογικό Μουσείο της Χαλκίδας στην Αρέθουσα, καθώς επίσης και στο παλιό Αρχαιολογικό Μουσείο της Οδού Βενιζέλου, το οποίο έχει τώρα πλήρως ανακαινιστεί και αποτελεί και αυτό ένα κόσμο μαζί με την Αρέθουσα. Ίσως είναι η μοναδική πόλη Χαλκίδα που διαθέτει αυτή τη στιγμή 2 μουσεία αρχαιολογικά. Και συντόμως στη σειρά του Ιδρύματος Λάτσι θα βγει και ο 21ος τόμος που θα έχει σαν θέμα το Μουσείο της Αρέθουσας. Σας ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ.
Ευχαριστώ κυρία Simosi για την εισαγωγή. Κυρίες και κύριοι, ladies and gentlemen, dear John, many thanks for your kind words and your very generous introduction. So I'm delighted to be back here at the school, which, as many of you know, holds a very special place in my heart for professional but also private reasons. So I would like to take this opportunity to thank Professor Jennifer Niles for her kind invitation to present tonight our work in Amarynthos. As you can see from the program, you're getting 3 speakers for the price of 1, reflecting, I think, the true spirit of collaboration of our project. So many others deserve to be on stage tonight, and we will do our best to bring them and to mention them tonight. I would also like to thank our institutional partners and generous supporters, the Greek Ministry of Culture, first of all, then the Swiss National Science Foundation, the Swiss Secretary for Education, Research and Education, the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, the Foundation of the Swiss School of Archaeology in Greece, as well as private donors. So after Mrs. Simosi's introduction, I will present the sanctuary of Artemis Amaryssia. I will insist on the history of research, which is really interesting and led to its identification as a monument in 2017. And then I will analyze the position of the shrine within the ancient landscape based on the results of our latest survey project. I will then pass the podium to Tamara, Saggini, who will review the plan of the sanctuary for you and focus on the extraordinary deposits that was excavated in 2020 and 2021. After 2 years of pandemic, I must say it's the first time we can present our latest results to the Athens community. And I would really like to thank again the American School for providing this opportunity. The Artemisian at Amarynthos was probably the most renowned sanctuary in Euboea. Its historical significance derives inter alia from the chapter that Strabo dedicated to the island in the 10th book of his geography. The Hellenistic sources consulted by Strabo, including perhaps the lost constitution of the Eretrians by Aristotle and his school, indicated that the sanctuary situated in the vicinity of Eretria hosted important public documents. Among them was a law regulating the annual procession from Eretria to Amarynthos. The ceremony took the form of a military parade composed of 3,000 hoplites, 600 cavalrymen, and 60 war chariots. A second document recorded by Strabo is this military agreement between the rival cities of Chalkis and Eretria, supposedly banning the use of missiles, a text, as you know, that has most often been associated with the semi-mythical Lelantine War. The function of epiphanestatos topos has been conferred by several epigraphic discoveries made since the 19th century. A treaty between Eretria and Istiaia, dated to 400 BCE, discloses the Eretrian copy of the decree. The decree shall be displayed, at the sanctuary of Amarynthos. The 2nd century honorific decree for Theopompos attests that the honorandus will be honored by the dedication of 2 bronze statues, one erected in the city gymnasium and one in the Artemisium in, I quote, the most visible location. The political role played by Artemis is attested in other texts and documents. Among them, the most significant is probably the law for the Artemisia, displayed in the sanctuary, Entoieros Artemidos, which established and regulated the sacrifices and the new musical competition intended to enhance the splendor of the festival, including the procession between Eretria and the shrine. Ranked first in the Eretrian pantheon alongside her brother Apollo Daphneforos, Artemis Amarynthos was also venerated beyond Eretrian borders. In Attica, an Amarynthos is attested in the deme of Atmonon, which is modern Marousi. Pausanias understood that the origin of this festival was to be found, I quote, in Amarynthos, where the Euboeans still worship Artemis Amarynthos. And thanks to Livy, drawing on a passage in Polybius, we know that people from Chalkis and Charistos joined in Amarynthos for the annual celebration of the goddess. Incidentally, an inscription from Charistos, published by Denis Knopfler, has now confirmed this testimony. Therefore, the Artemision was Euboea's most renowned shrine in the Hellenistic and classical period. The cult itself must be, however, much older, extending back to the geometric period. An occupation at the site of Amarynthos should go way back to the Mycenaean period, when the name Amarynthos, Amaruto, appears on a Linear B tablet from the Theban Cadmea. But where is the Artemision? Until the 19th century, amongst travelers and archaeologists, very few doubted that the sanctuary of Artemis Amarynthos was near Eretria. Strabo's testimony disclosed the position of the small town, Kome, of Amarynthos, at 7 stadia, which is 1.2 kilometers away from the city walls, the Tichos of Eretria. You might think, piece of cake. Early scholars felt confident that locating the site would be straightforward. However, things became a bit more complicated, turning the question of its localization into the most vexed and burning issue of Euboean topography for over a century. The first attempt for excavating the Artemision, in fact, was initiated here in 1891 by the American School of Classical Studies, which, as you know, was then active at Eretria. A small team composed of Rufus Richardson, director of the school, John Pickard, and John Gilbert, was excavating the theater and the gymnasium, as well as mapping for the first time the city walls. Now, the story of Gilbert has been beautifully written by John Lee, whom I salute here and thanking for his most stimulating exchanges we had over the years. Richardson wrote a small excursus on the location of the temple of Artemis Amarynthos, published in AGA in 1895. Based on Strabo's 7 stadia, he started excavating the hill of Cotroni, where an old church displayed several spolia and inscribed marbles within its walls. Unfortunately, only modern walls appeared, and the excavation was resumed after 2 days. But Richardson suspected that Strabo might have been erred or been the victim of bad copying, and suggested to excavate a church near Katovathia further east. And this will be important, you'll see. Conversely, several accidental discoveries made in the region of Katovathia suggested that the Artemision might be located further to the east in the area of the Paleoclesias Hill. Kourouniotis and Eric Ziebart gathered epigraphic evidence which favored this location. The discoveries should have, once and for all, directed investigations to the area of Paleoclesias Hill, as suggested by Richardson. However, the debate about the position of Amarynthos continued. Here. Some scholars were reluctant to correct and discard Strabo's precise testimony. Many archaeologists, like John Boardman in 1957, followed the traditional localization and focused on remains located in the suburban area of Eretria at Magula. Reverdin and Lasserre remained faithful to the Strabonian distance by proposing a location near the chapel of Hagia Paraskevi, distant only 1.2 kilometers from the city wall, but without success. In the early 1970s, Denis Knopfler carried out a systematic study of the available evidence. He reached the conclusion that the distance given by Strabo was incorrect, a possibility already suggested by Richardson in 1895. But how can this mistake be accounted for? That's the question. And this is where Knopfler came up with a brilliant hypothesis. At some point in the transmission of the text, the written numbers were probably replaced by numbers spelled in alphabetical notation. In the latter system, the number 7 is transcribed by the letter zeta, whose mark is almost identical to the letter xi, which equals 60 exikonda. A Byzantine copyist could have easily mistaken a zeta for a xi with the handwriting. Therefore, it can be reasonably assumed that the original text of the geography of Strabo reported the distance as 60 stadia and not 7 between Eretria and Amarynthos. This number, 60, which is approximately 11 kilometers, perfectly fits the length of a direct path between Eretria's east gate and the western foot of the Paleoclesias hill, where, you remember, inscriptions published by Koroniotis and Tsibart had been discovered. Moreover, the hill was a Mycenaean site studied by the 1966 BSA survey, which is a sine qua non condition for locating the Amaruto of the Thebes tablet. Therefore, the distance of 60 stadia, precisely measured, as was customary in ancient Greece for sacred roads, was the length of the sacred road, the Hiera Odos, leading from Eretria to its main extramural shrine in Amarynthos. Knopfler's hypothesis was well received. However, it still needed to be validated by the discovery of remains of various dates was discovered by the Greek Archaeological Service at a place known as Ayakiriaki, which is 800 meters, 800, northwest of Paleoclesias. The discovery was followed by preliminary publication by Dr. Efi Sapuna-Sekalaraki in 1992. Although no architectural remains were discovered during the rescue excavation, the discovery redirected research away from the Paleoclesias hill. At this point, it seemed that the sanctuary could have been buried under the thick alluvial deposits of the Sarandapotamos, or, worse, under a modern villa. However, between 2003 and 2004, a new project was initiated by the Swiss School and the Ephor of Antiquities of Euboea under the co-direction of Denis Knopfler, Amalia Cabral-Escalido, and myself. A large-scale geophysical survey was carried out in the area of the Paleoclesias hill, followed by a trial trench in 2006 in what appeared to be a promising plot. So the excavation led to the discovery of an important Middle Helladic site, which is very cool, but there was no evidence related to the presence of a shrine. However, during the 2006 excavation, a local informant advised me to visit a neighboring field where a modern villa had been built. I discovered a marble block with an aterosis clearly belonging to a monumental building. This discovery proved to be a turning point. In 2007, in the neighboring plot, we excavated the foundations of a major building buried 2.5 meters below the surface, which explained why nothing had been found for centuries. These foundations turned out to be part of a large stoa. In the following decade, strategically located private plots were acquired, and the Greco-Swiss team extended the excavation to 4,000 square meters, thanks to the financial support of private donors and the Swiss government. Several ancient buildings, including a large stoa, were unearthed, suggesting the existence of a monumental complex in this sector, in all probability the sanctuary of Artemis Amaryssia. Despite the spectacular breakthrough, the final proof, as you know, so important in classical archaeology, was missing: textual evidence. It finally came in 2017 when the team, then directed by Karl Reber, discovered stamped tiles from the 2nd century CE with the name of Artemis in retrograde, Artemidos, belonging to Artemis. The discovery was celebrated by the Hellenic Postal Service with a special stamp, and were indeed really honored. This discovery was followed by others. A large marble step, reused in the staircase of a Roman sacred well, proved to be a late 5th century decree, entirely preserved. Currently studied by Denis Knopfler, whom I salute because it's his birthday today, it stands among the oldest Sympolitia decrees known in the Greek world, attesting the political union between Eretria and the southern polis of Styra, who joined the Eretrian polis as a demos, as a deme. Other honorific inscriptions mentioning the triad of Artemis, Apollo, and Leto followed, solving this, I quote, burning question of Euboean topography, as Richardson qualified it in 1895. Now, with the Artemisians' position firmly established, it becomes possible to study the integration of the shrine within the ancient landscape. And in order to achieve this objective, a new archaeological field project was launched in 2021 under the lead of Dr. Angeliki Simosi and myself, and with the active collaboration of Chloé Chazot. We employed what we call in survey an intensive pedestrian survey method, with field walkers walking side by side, spaced evenly at 10 meters apart, and recording all visible surface pottery, tiles, and lithics within a 2 meters wide transect in order to produce density maps such as the one you see below. The project is supplemented with extensive survey and site documentation, DGPS and drone mapping, as well as LiDAR-based remote sensing with the collaboration of Alex Nodell and Thomas Garrison. Preliminary results throw a new light on the human occupation of the plain, the agriculture, and the communication network, including the Hieraudos. So besides Eretria and Amarynthos, occupation remained pretty much discrete in the plain in the Bronze Age and the early Iron Age. However, at the end of the Archaic period, we record an increase in occupation. Although we studied the study of the pottery remains at a preliminary stage, 4 settlement sites seem to have been occupied at the end of the 6th century between the 2 spots. Now, if verified in the future, the presence of late archaic secondary settlements between Eretria and Amarynthos would be notable, as the Archaic period remains really poorly represented in survey projects in Greece. It would also confirm Herodotus' testimony, which mentions Coria in the countryside during the Persian siege of Eretria in 490 BCE, and demonstrate the vitality of the occupation during this period. This trend becomes more pronounced in the classical period, as attested by the discovery of surface pottery in 72 survey units versus 10 for the Archaic period, and you can see them here in orange. The number also demonstrates the spreading of rural habitation, characterized by the formation of secondary settlements and the erection of rural houses and farmsteads. In parallel, we record a densification of 4 to 6 nucleated settlements, whose size can be estimated at 2, 3, or 4 hectares. I currently interpret these settlements as deme centers, and several of them are known from inscriptions and Herodotus himself: Temenos, Koreai, Aigalea, and Dismaros. And I offer here a tentative location for these demes based on the new archaeological and epigraphic evidence. In the Hellenistic period, we record a regression in occupation. If the main settlements are still occupied, they seem to decrease in size, confirming the impression of a diminution in rural occupation in the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC. During the Roman period, however, we note a slight increase in occupation, mainly occupation grouped, around the deme centers that were already occupied in the classical and Hellenistic period. So we still have to survey the eastern part of the plain this summer, in a few months, and in 2023. However, at this stage, the preliminary results tend to demonstrate that the Eretria-Amarynthos plain was intensively occupied between the late Archaic and early Hellenistic periods. Therefore, the shrine of Amarynthos did not have a liminal position. It was surrounded by a busting rural landscape dominated by many demes and an intensive, as you will see, road network. Now, the position of the main settlements now allow us to redraw the communication axes within this space. The first axis crossed Eretria's eastern necropolis, here, and roughly followed the coast in the direction of Amarynthos. Now, this road is important. It's a highway, and it's the main axis crossing Euboea from north to south, going through Chalkis, Eretria, Aliveri, ancient Porthmos, Styra, and Charistos. Other axes connected the deme centers, as well as the main saddles connecting the plain to the other regions of central Euboea. But what about the sacred road? Richardson provides crucial information. He says, from Eretria's east gate, the course of the sacred way, I quote, can be traced with absolute certainty for miles to the east by the multitude of graves which lie on either side. The immense necropolis east of the city was badly damaged and pillaged in the course of the 19th century and early 20th century. Fortunately, many objects worried their way to the National Museum here in Athens, where we can admire the splendid vases and jewelry from Eretria's cemeteries. My friend and colleague, Maria Chiviroglu, is studying the museum's archives related to the Eretria-Amarynthos area, and I'm really looking forward to sharing our survey data with her. Fortunately, the intensive survey conducted in 2021 has brought a new light on this rich funerary landscape. Besides trace of tombs and grave terraces, we discovered funerary cipi and stellae, as well as architectural blocks and sculpture belonging to grave monuments. The most impressive discovery was this large fragment of white marble, really rare in survey archaeology, found in a field east of Eretria. Another spectacular find was this marble fragment, which is perhaps part of the body of a sea monster. Stunningly, it matches with a large fragment which was brought to the Eretria Museum from Magula in the same area and published by Stefan Schmidt in 2000. Now for us, by systematically mapping the funerary finds, we come up with a new map of Eretria's east necropolis, which extended over several kilometers or miles in the direction of the demes and along the sacred road, as noted by Richardson and Fachard in 1895. And you can see their drawing, you can see the sacred way going towards Amarynthos, and they're surrounded by graves. During the survey, tenuous traces of a road were spotted 2 kilometers east of Eretria and followed discontinuously for some 600 meters, thanks to the LiDAR data. The presence of funerary monuments along this axis, attested by the discovery of tombs, several sculpture fragments, and architectural blocks, attests to the significance of this road. Oral testimonies record the presence of a pavement made of stone slabs and wheel ruts, which have now unfortunately disappeared. Now, based on current evidence, this stretch is the best candidate for the sacred road, the Hieraudos, an idea which seems to have been adopted by the street signs for some time now, and I had to convince my team that I knew nothing about this sign just before obliging them to walk for a month under the sun. Now, from this point on, the Hieraudos is lost under modern villas and fenced plots. If we're lucky, we might locate additional stretches this summer or in the next survey seasons. At any rate, from this point on the GIS least cost path analysis suggests a direct path to the Artemision, which closely matches the main road of the 1835 French staff map. The least cost path is 11.4 kilometers long, which matches almost perfectly the Strabonian corrected distance of 60 stadia.
So good evening, everyone. As Sylvian said, I will be now presenting the temple and then the offering deposit that we discovered and excavated the last 2 years. In fact, 2020 was marked by the identification of the Temple of Artemis following the discovery of this spectacular offering deposit within its foundations. The temple is located at the center of the so far excavated sanctuary. In its last phase, the temple is framed by stoai north and east and by oikoi north and south. To the east, it is facing an altar. The temple is oriented east-west. A part of the east side of the building, where you see the red cross on the slide, was already excavated 4 years ago, uncovering mainly the foundations when the house built over it was destroyed. This part will be further explored this summer. On the west side, at which the orange arrow is pointing, we discovered a wall in 2020, which we thought was the back wall of the temple. But truly, this was a mere wish, because we were digging at the limits between the excavation field and the private property. Last year's excavation revealed that this is a partition wall within the temple, defining another room, maybe an aditon or an opisthostomos. The foundations of the temple are 10 meters wide for more than 30 meters long. Inside the temple, several bases were discovered and indicate the possible presence of a central colonnade, but so far we did not explore extensively the external part outside of the foundations, but for now we have no traces of an external one. The feature of this plan reminds temples like the Heraion of Samos or other Artemis temples like the one in Aulis, Brauron, or Halai. There are not many elements from the elevation that are preserved, mostly tiles and antefix. The pieces you see here on the slide could belong to the temple's roof. The temple in gray on the slide is built at the end of the 6th century, and it's functioning with a large altar to its east, also visible in gray. The last temple is installed over and partially overlapping a previous temple, of which you can see the remains in purple on the slide. This previous temple was probably built between the 7th and the 6th century. It seems much smaller than its successor. So far, we uncovered part of its foundations on approximately 12 meters long by 5 meters wide. Its walls are made of dry stone foundation with a mud brick elevation. On the east part of the building, we brought to light a second altar, certainly in function with this earlier temple. It has the shape of a horseshoe and is outlined by a dry stone wall with mud brick elevation. Its sides were covered by a thick white chalk coating. In the center of the altar, a succession of burnt clay and ash layers are attesting several phases of use. The temple and the altar are linked by a mud brick pavement made of square slabs. Lastly, in the deeper levels of the trenches, we uncovered walls marked here in green. They are possibly those of a third building dated to the 8th century. Last year, we focused on the 7 trenches that you can see in orange on this plan. During the 2 last years, more than 600 objects were brought to light within the foundations of the temple. Due to this exceptional situation, the integrality of the soil was sieved or kept for flotation. 6,740 liters of soil were sieved, which is the equivalent of almost 40 to 50 bathtubs, depending on the size of the used bathtub, of course. And 2,570 liters of soil went through flotation, that is 15 to 20 bathtubs. In other words, this is totalizing 9 cubic meters. The sieving was made by one person during the whole excavation and by the students in the afternoon. It allowed us to retrieve very small items, almost invisible during the excavation, although we were carefully and meticulously working. The flotation samples were treated by Alexia Iliadou and will be studied by Evi Margaritis, both of whom we thank. The site was also sampled for micromorphology analysis by the Wiener Lab of the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, with whom we are collaborating, and we wish to thank Takis Karkanas, Dimitris Roussos, and Myrsini Gouma for their work so far. Let's move on now to the offering deposit. Don't worry, tonight we will not discuss the 600 objects. We will instead briefly see the different categories, and I will provide you with a general idea of the assemblage. Nothing has been published yet, so we ask you to not use images from this presentation. Let's start with the vases. Around 80 full vases have been brought to light so far. The majority of the vases are closed shapes, 54. There are 20 open shapes, and there are 6 metal vessels. Among the closed shapes, many hydriscoi were found, and a few high-neck jug, probably both shapes locally made. Some of the hydriscoi have a well-divided neck, and some have a more pear shape. The jugs are all similar. They have a high neck, a low and round body connected by a vertical strap handle, and a conical foot. Their decoration is not figured, but with bands and waves. We know very well both of these shapes from a deposit in Eretria, located close to the Temple of Apollo in the center of the city, called the North Sacrificial Area, where thousands of these vases were found. The area is certainly devoted to Artemis, as suggested by Sandrine Hubert in her publication, the volume 14 of the collection Eretria. Most of the other closed shapes are black figured. Several black figure hydriae were found in the deposit, and probably some of them are of local production. Some bear a figure decoration, and some have a simple chain with palmet and lotus, or just lotus buds facing downwards. Another well-represented shape is the lekythos. Most of them are black figure, and there is one black glaze and one white ground. The taller one, down left, belongs to the attic workshop of the Fanilis painter. The 3 at the top are of the Fanilis class. As you can see, their shape is very similar to the attic one, but they're probably of local production, along with the small black glaze lekythos. The lekythos down right is a very rare product, as regards its shape, as well as its technique of decoration. The very narrow rim and neck are linked to a flat and angular shoulder. The cylindrical body has a bulky lower part and ends on a molded flat disc foot. On its shoulder, palmets and flowers are represented in the red figure technique with white ground, while the scene on its body is black figure with white ground. It can be attributed to the painter of New York 07. Other closed shapes are less numerous. There are a few black figure olpai, trefoil jugs or oinokoi, neck amphora, and there is one monochrome belly amphora, which is rather unusual. Regarding the open vases, you can see here only a few examples because some of them are still treated by the conservators. Cotyli and cotyliskoi represent the majority of them and are probably locally made. We also found a few black glaze and black figure cup skiphoi, 2 one-handlers, and a quite rare black figure Nicostinian type pyxis. A few metal vessels were discovered, in total 4 bronze fialae and 2 others so far unidentified bronze and iron vessels. Here you can see 2 of the fialae that have been already treated by the conservators, and the one at the bottom has a bone or ivory rim decoration. But more vases are waiting to be processed in the apotheki. Because of the exceptional character of this assemblage, we are going to conduct 2 types of analysis, without which we will otherwise not be able to answer some of the very important questions about this deposit. On the one hand, 27 vases are going to be sampled to conduct organic residue analysis, which will be undertaken by Maria Rumbu. Among our goals, we wish to understand First, if the vases were used or not prior deposition, and compare these results to our archaeological examination, as it appears that some of them bear traces of use and some don't. Then, if they were used, with what were they used? To see, for example, if the expected use of a vase can be confirmed or not by this analysis, and more generally, to better understand the function of this deposit. Third, it would be interesting to see if there is a distinction in use between local and imported vases. On the other hand, this assemblage of vases is ideal to better define Euboean and Eretrian black figure production. During the last years, the Swiss School and the Fitch Lab of the British School at Athens have been conducting a diachronic project on clay analysis to better define the Eretrian production. In this frame, and with the results already obtained, it will be fundamental and of a crucial importance to conduct clay analysis on the vases at Amarynthos as well. This will be undertaken by Evangelio Kyriadzi and Noemi Müller, whom we thank. On this slide, you can see a summary of the vases we went through, and all the way down, I added also a black figure Thymiaterion, which is part of the assemblage. To sum up, the figured vases are mostly close shape, while the open shapes are more simply decorated and also less numerous. Many of the vases are shapes intended for water use, hydriae, hydriskoi, and probably also the high-neck jugs. The latter are local and found good parallels in the North Sacrificial area, which is not my field of expertise, but the study is undertaken by Pauline Maillard. The most impressive finding is a bunch of more than 20 full plank figurines. Each of them needs months of conservation, and you see them here patiently waiting for their turn to come. For those who are not familiar, they are flat figurines with a molded inserted head. You can see the fixation system on the left photo, and they are decorated with a beautiful thick white color with added red or blue. A few other figures were also found. You can see here some of them, like the more common seated figurine. You also see down left the tallest plank figurine we found. It measures over 30 centimeters, which is quite huge. This figurine is quite rare and a special artifact. It's a woman standing wearing a diadem, holding a crown in one hand and a lotus flower in the other. It was probably produced in the east part of the Aegean. Among the clay findings, objects related to textile work like loom weights, epinetra, and spindle whorl were also found, but in small quantity within the temple. A larger group was discovered in the southern oikoi. Let's move on now to the small finds. Some of them are already under study by Sora Urfer. A few bronze figurines or appliques were discovered. You can see here a lion holding a sheep in his mouth, and this representation resonates very well together with the images on the vases showing wild animals. But most of the objects are poorly preserved or simply not identifiable before conservation work. An exception is this bronze mirror, which was very well preserved. The disc is not decorated, but the handle is representing a young naked woman with almond-shaped eyes and an archaic smile, moving the left foot forward. She's playing the crotales. On her head, she wears a diadem, and she wears also a necklace. Across her body, a strap with a crescent-shaped amulet hanging is attached. A similar handle is to be found, for example, on a Laconian mirror exhibited at the Met. A lot of pendants, jewelry, pins, or beads made of different materials like bronze, gold, glass, silver, faience, frit, bone, or ivory were found, as well as 2 golden appliques. Additionally, we discovered a few glass amphoriscoi, like the one on the left, several scarab seals, and a lion-shaped seal. During the excavation, some items required the presence on site of a conservator. Here, you see one of our conservators consolidating a bronze shield found in the western part of the temple. The localization is indicated on the plan in the left upper corner. Next to it, we uncovered an iron helmet. The extraction of the shield was impossible without consolidation on the site, and just to give you an idea, the estimation time for the conservation work of this object is about 1 year. On the eastern part, we faced an even more difficult situation. A crushed item, maybe a wooden larnax with bronze casings, was excavated. In the same area, we found more than 30 pieces of 3 different types of fabric, one of them probably with purple color, together with an iron blade also bearing fabric residues on it that could have been placed in the larnax wrapped in the fabric piece. The study of the textile is undertaken by Bella Dimova. This impressive deposit is concentrated against the north wall of the earlier temple. In the center, we didn't find the same concentration of objects. The area was more perturbated and the layers contained many burnt residues. The most interesting feature in the center is a base may be used for a statue. As you could see, the majority of the objects were fully preserved and had simply collapsed in situ. Most of them seem to have been placed carefully before having fallen where we discovered them. Moreover, the deposit seems very homogeneous typologically and chronologically, and the majority of the objects are dating to the last quarter of the 6th century. These characteristics give the impression that the whole deposit is a consequence of one intention. The majority of the filling soil around the deposit contained burnt mud brick or charcoal fragments, but interestingly, none of the late 6th century objects bear traces of fire. The filling soil around contained also very few fragmentary finds, essentially dated earlier to the 7th or the beginning of the 6th century. They, in contrast, present sometimes traces of fire. All this could imply that the early archaic temple burned, after which the debris were shuffled to clean up and level the area. Then, an offering deposit was placed, and finally the area was filled with soil for the construction of the last temple at the end of the 6th century. This working hypothesis will be further investigated during the next field seasons. This year, we will be carrying out more work in the trenches already open, here in orange, and explore new ones in the western and eastern parts of the temples, here in red. Our team is ready and very much looking forward. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you all very much for an outstanding presentation of some fabulous material. Are there questions in the room here? I'm going to deal with questions that are live, and Maura is going to deal with some that come in from afar. So no matter who you are or where you are, you should feel free to ask a question or two before those of us who are smart enough to be in this room can go to a reception. Do we have any questions, please, from the audience, the live audience? Comments, thoughts? Yeah, Red. Should I?
Very simple question.
Syl, you sounded very categoric that this is not, a liminal sanctuary on the border. How far is the next city over to the west and south, and where would you place its borders?
Thanks for the question. I provoked a bit the audience by throwing this liminality word, which I don't really like, and it's often misused. No, there's, as you probably know, the sanctuary of Artemis has been also studied by de Polignac in his famous book on the polyogenesis of the Greek polis. And although the sanctuary, which is a bit paradoxical, but although the sanctuary hadn't been located precisely, he knew approximately where it was in the plain of Eretria and Amarynthos, and said that it had a liminal character at the border of the plain in a kind of wilderness, at the extremity of the plain. And what the survey shows is quite the opposite, in fact. It's surrounded by a settlement. In fact, there's also the deme of Amarynthos, which we haven't located yet, but I hope that this summer we're gonna be surveying all around the sanctuary and up towards the mountains. So I think we'll have more, information about that. But my preliminary survey, extensive, that I've done around shows a fully occupied landscape, pretty much. We have graves to the east, we have a small necropolis, we have settlements, we have, you name it, you call it. So it's the plain of Eretria was one of the most fertile, grounds in central Euboea, and there's no real liminal character around this. It was a bustling landscape, as I said, fully occupied, and from the sanctuary you could probably hear, dogs barking and people working in their fields. And I had supported to mention that. Now, in terms of macro geographics, it is indeed towards the end of the plain, but this end of the plain is not really where the Artemision is. You still have to walk several kilometers, and the Artemision is on the main highway between Chalkida, Eretria, and southern Euboea. Okay, so if you call it liminal, then I don't disagree.
Thank you very much. I'd like just to ask if you have any coin finds.
If we have
Coins. In the
coins. Not in the, not in the area of the temple. Now, outside the temple, yes, we do. We also mentioned very briefly, because, we didn't have time to mention every single monument within the shrine, but there's a sacred well that we mentioned. That was where we found the inscription, several inscriptions that were reused in the staircase. And in the well, in the sacred well, there were coins. But I don't know much about them, I have to say. I'm not sure, they haven't been really studied yet. Tamara, you want to add something? That's it. You have to come this summer.
Maura, do you have any questions from abroad?
Nothing online.
Anybody else?
Thank you, everybody, for this fantastic presentation. I have a question you might not be able to ask because the work is still in such a preliminary stage. But can you characterize the finds? I wonder. I must admit, I was intrigued by to characterize it in such a way at this point?
Yeah, you're right. So an answer perhaps in two parts, and Tamara should come up to the stage to answer to the second part of the question regarding the material proper. But as you know, I mean, Artemis had many faces and many functions, and we often talk about the goddess of the wilderness and, you know, wild animals, but that was only one of many. And another one was to protect young women and young men, you know, during the difficult phases of their life, including giving birth for women to children. And it's too early, and we're extremely cautious with the team. We're still excavating this deposit, so we don't want to throw anything out there that we might regret in 6 months or a year. But indeed, it seems that that was one of the functions, and it was probably, I mean, Artemis was probably worshipped as a protector of young women and young adolescents. And that probably is one of the echoes that we have from the material. But perhaps Tamara should come and add a few things about this.
Yeah, and I think there is already one evidence we can mention in this direction. The pyxis that I showed you before was also containing fabric inside, as if they placed the fabric and then offered the pyxis with the fabric inside, and together, you're right, with the mirror and the jewelry, etc. It's really pointing to this side of Artemis, at least this direction. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any questions?
Thank you. I hope I haven't missed anything that you said, but we know that the Persians were in Eretria. Have you found any evidence of their invasion, presence, destruction, etc.?
Where? In Amarynthos?
Yes.
So, to answer this question, I should probably go back to the map. As you know, when Herodotus in Book 6 describes the siege of Eretria by the Persians, he gives us very important information regarding the 3 choria where the Persians established their camp. And these choria have been, you know, misinterpreted topographically for, I would say, some time. But thanks now to the survey and also with the collaboration of Denis Knopfler on some of the inscriptions that we found in the onomastics, we're fairly confident in providing, you know, the map I showed you. So Herodotus mentions Chorae, Temenos, and Aigalia here. So obviously what the Persian army did is they established camp here east of Eretria. It makes perfect sense. They didn't want to go west because they could be hit by the Chalcidians on their back. So they established their camp here. They were protected by the Servouni Mountains here, and they had enough room for their fleet. Now, the fact that Herodotus gives these 3 toponyms is really remarkable. And we think that they were in this area. Now, to answer your question, is that what happened to Amarynthos? Since you had this huge army here, what happened? And we know specifically from Herodotus that the Persians, the goal of the expedition was to burn the temples in Eretria and the shrines, this payback from Sardis. So did they see the Artemision? I would think yes. They knew where it was. They had scouts. They knew what they were doing. Now, what happened to the shrine? We can't say anything. It's just too early. But we have no evidence currently, right, of any destruction. But we don't know. It was a long answer.
Okay. I think we can continue this discussion downstairs where there is a reception, and thank our speakers one more time for interesting.
Thank you.
Amen.